Happy Halloween, ladies and gentlemen. Excuse me. Welcome back to another episode of the Top 10 favorite and, from what I believe, are the best films by the greatest directors ever. We are starting from 10 and then working up to number 1. And yes, you crazy kids, I have seen all of their particular films, so all of these lists come from true accuracy. Since it is Halloween, trick or treat, I am inspired to talk about one of the greatest writer-directors that just fits the theme of horror perfectly. His name is Wes Craven. Born in good old Cleveland, Ohio, and raised as a fundamentalist Baptist, Wes Craven was never allowed to see films until his senior year in college. With the exception of Disney movies, of course. How could you not? He got his bachelor's in English and psychology, and his master's in philosophy at Johns Hopkins University. During that time, he was struggling with a vision for his future. He was teaching college courses and potentially working on his PhD. But one day, he just happened to catch all of the new wave European films that were sweeping the US at the point, with Truffaut, Godard, Buñuel, Fellini films, that we just became obsessed with film. It kind of makes sense though, right? Since he's been told his whole life to avoid films, and then he gains access to them later on in his life, it becomes a whole new experience for him. From then on, he decided to pursue film. He jumped ship, quit his teaching job, quit his path of getting a PhD, bought a 16mm camera, moved to New York, and slowly but surely built his experience within the business to then become one of the most influential artists in horror films. What I love so much about Wes Craven is that behind all of his truly terrifying films, he was such a level-headed, preppy, and truly nice guy. If you've seen any of his interviews, you can definitely see how poetic and intelligent he was, which not a lot of people expect out of a horror film director. Like, do all horror film directors wear Ralph Lauren shirts to work? Not that I know of. For those of you who have not heard of Wes Craven, hopefully after talking about his best films here, bells will start ringing and you will gather up some popcorn, turn out the lights, cuddle up with your friends or significant other, and have fun with his films on this Halloween night. Are you ready, boys and girls? Here are the top 10 best films of the terrifying and poetic Wes Craven. Starting off at number 10, we actually have one of the only, normal, family-friendly films that Wes Craven ever did, with Music of the Heart. This stars Meryl Streep in one of her 487 Academy Award-nominated performances as Roberta. Based on a true story, who was a violin teacher who comes to an inner-city school in Harlem to teach kids how to be the best they can be with music, and to save the arts. I'll be honest, the film itself is not as great as other more notable films in this genre, like Stand and Deliver, Mr. Holland's Opus, oh I love that film, and Dangerous Minds. And that's really a script issue, but Wes Craven chose this film based on a 3-picture deal, and was a huge fan of classical music. There are still some very touching moments in this film, and Wes Craven was so glad to do, in his own words, a normal film. Number 9. Scream 2. Okay, here we go. Obviously the follow-up to the ever-so-popular Scream, this trails heroine Sydney in college, where the Ghostface killer has a mission to take her down, but then pluck each student along the way. I sincerely really like this sequel. It did something very significant that a lot of sequels tend to slip on, reintroducing the characters the audience know and care about, adding to their story without taking anything away, while introducing new characters that we grow to care about just the same. One thing is huge about Wes Craven is that he had fantastic setups and intros, like Scream 2 had in the movie premiere with Jada Pinkett Smith in the very beginning. It was so great. It was executed just masterfully. I also don't mind that scene with grown-up Vern singing in the cafeteria, because come on, it's a horror film. There's got to be some relief of tension and play somehow. The play on satire with glorifying the events of the first film in a movie called Stab, that's just so funny and ridiculous. All in all, this film itself works very well and has some great, genuine jumping moments in it. Give it another watch if you haven't seen it for quite a bit. Number 8. The Hills Have Eyes. One of the most influential and terrifying films in horror, which came out in 1977. Riding a little high off of Craven's last film, Last House on the Left, the producers were wanting Craven to do another horror film that was on the same level. And Craven wanted to do a normal film. And he was like, okay. He was then inspired to write a story about a vacationing suburban family who gets stranded in the Nevada desert. And then turns out, they got lost in the wrong desert. Another family of scavenger cannibals start to terrorize the family, and more scares come about. Quite frankly, this is not an easy film to watch, as it is very terrifying. The first time I saw this film, I could not believe what was happening by the time the cannibals make their way inside the camper. And if you have seen this film, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That seriously got to me, and still does every time I see it. It also has a great blend of dark comedy in it too, which I definitely appreciate. Horror can definitely be a step away from comedy, which is always really fun. The critics have called this film trash, etc., but has been re-examined and appreciated for its commentary on morale and the political nature of our fellow man. It has spawned a direct sequel that Craven did, which we will not talk about. It's utterly useless. Craven would definitely agree and admit that himself. Then, a remake following another sequel, which was produced by Craven. So this film has a lot of honor behind it, and is sure to scare the pants off of you. Number 7, Red Eye. Man, did this film surprise me. I saw this in theaters when it first came out in 2005 with my parents. I was honestly not excited because I said, who the frick are Rachel McAdams and Cillian Murphy? Yeah, after this film, I absolutely love them. McAdams plays a hotel manager who has to take a red eye back to Miami. She meets a charming young guy at the airport lounge and then, what? You're sitting next to me on the plane? What a lovely coincidence. All seems great and positive, and seems like there's a real good, romance that's blossoming here. Until, snap. He's a terrorist who plans to assassinate the head of Homeland Security, and he needs her to switch hotel rooms to complete the operation. Otherwise, her dad will be killed. Like I said, this film caught me completely by surprise, because I didn't know anything about it. Not only is the writing and acting top-notch, but Wes Craven guided it with such ease and intelligence. It honestly reminded me of a modern Hitchcock thriller. The moment when we, the audience, start to realize who Cillian Murphy is and what is really going on, I was on the edge the whole time. The ending, to me, felt a little contrived, but hey, it all still worked. This was also one of the only real profitable films for Wes Craven, sadly enough, which he totally deserved. Please check this one out if you're not a fan of gore and all that stuff, but you like chilling thrillers. Oh, this would definitely be up your alley. Number 6, The Serpent and the Rainbow. A film that is very, very significant. Loosely based on a non-fiction book of the same title, it tells the story of an ethnobotanist who is recruited to learn more about a drug that is being used by black magic voodoo practitioners in Haiti, which is turning the dead into zombies. They physically bury them and they arise from the dead. The whole aspect of being buried, practically alive, is still... Now, the interesting thing about this film is that Craven was forced to do so many themes. His whole career was practically forced by producers. He never really had full say and full final cut, unfortunately. And this movie is no different. It's like a mixed bag. At first, it's a cultural supernatural, then it's a cultural drama, then you have your horror, then we are blending in some action. There are so many things going on in this film, which is why it comes off a bit confusing. But Craven was forced, again, to do it and to please so many producers. But you know what? It all still works, quite frankly. All the performances are great, with Bill Pullman leading the way. Don't bury me! I'm not dead! That was crazy. There are not many great horror films that include the voodoo culture as well. So I do recommend this one for sure. Number 5, The People Under the Stairs. Another great surprise when I first saw it. This came out in 1991, right around the time Craven was more into horror comedies, funny enough. This stars a young Brandon Adams, who played De Nunez in The Sandlot. Oh, childhood memories. But before he was a badass pitcher, he was a badass little criminal. Well, he is. He, along with two other robbers, one of them played by Ving Rhames, was breaking and entering into a couple's home with the goal of stealing a rare coin collection that is hiding in the house. As they work on finding the collection, the team slowly suspect very strange activity going on in the house. Once we figure out what this couple is hiding and doing, we quickly escalate from a thriller to horror. The boy is now running for his life, and he discovers all of these stray people living under the stairs. But can he escape on his own? Or can he make some allies along the way? Man, this movie is a lot of fun. It's not really talked about as much. The performances are fantastic, by the way. Brandon Adams and Ving Rhames are just wonderful in this. But the big high fives go to Everett McGill and Wendy Roby, who played the sinister and straight up batshit crazy couple who owned the house, who are actually cast together after Wes Craven watched their beautiful performances on one of my favorite shows ever, Twin Peaks. This film certainly says a lot about political agenda and human morale, which again is very thought-provoking. Wes Craven was genuinely so smart with messages like this in all of his films. This is so good, it definitely needs to be viewed, and from what I understand, Jordan Peele is apparently working on remaking this film, which, honestly, I think that would be really great. Number 4, The Last House on the Left. The original, of course. The film that, honest to God, I literally had to repeat its own tagline to myself. It's only a movie, only a movie. It tells the story of two teenage girls who are on the way to a rock concert, and then they see a guy selling some grass, and he convinces them to come back to his apartment, where they are trapped by a total of 4 criminals, which then lead to such brutal and unfortunate deaths. The criminals then stumble upon the house of a couple. Unbeknownst to the criminals, are the parents of one of the teenage girls they killed. It is slowly revealed who the criminals are, and then examines the actions if the parents should take the law into their own hands. This film still terrifies me to this day. It's really hard to even tell myself it's only a movie, just because things like this, where girls are abducted and raped, happen all the time around the world. It's horrible to say, but it's true. This film was funded by Sean Cunningham, who would one day direct a little movie called Friday the 13th. You ever heard of it? And Wes Craven was given the funds to make the film with the understanding it would be kind of on edge of like a sex, horror, shock film, since Wes Craven was working in porn theaters at the time. Wes promised himself, he got the money, but then he promised his actors that there would be nothing of a kind involving like any pornographic scenes or anything like that. Shock terror, sure, but anything that involves more sexual, grossness, he was not up for. He just had to play his cards right in order to get the film made, which I know you ask yourself, how can a man make a film like this so twisted? And the answer has always been, well, how do you make an anti-violence film? The effects of the Vietnam War and politics were changing our society in such a drastic way. So in this mindset, it was taking a subject and pushing the envelope. Shock and visceral terror became among the influences. Wes Craven was actually channeling famed European filmmaker Ingmar Bergman's classic, The Virgin's Spring, which is really kind of similar to this story. But this obviously had audiences fainting, vomiting, traumatized. It did its job, basically. And of course, critics utterly trashed the film for its graphic nature, but an underground cult following was instantly sparked because a lot of young audiences got it, and modern audiences today still get it. Doesn't make it any nicer, of course, but it's one of those films that has such a wild blend of shock, horror, genuine human drama, unbelievably black comedy, and some of the creepiest background transition country music in a film you would ever hear. It was remade as well in 2009, with Craven producing again, and honestly, folks, I respect this film because it's not just a snuff film. Wes Craven was actually giving a message. You may not agree with the execution of it, and that's totally okay. I have the worst trouble watching it myself. But it is a message on nonviolence. And do we take the law in our own hands when it becomes a major threat to our loved ones? It remains a cult classic and major influence in a deeper form of shock horror today. Number 3, New Nightmare. Or better yet, technically known as Wes Craven's New Nightmare. If you're not a Nightmare on Elm Street fan, it's fine, because I think this film will definitely interest you. Obviously, Wes Craven is the creator of A Nightmare on Elm Street, not the sequels which followed afterwards, which I still really enjoy. After the premiere of Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare, killing off Freddy Krueger, what do the producers do? Yeah, let's make another Nightmare movie. So they went back to Wes Craven, and after seeing all the sequels himself, Craven had no idea what to do, except basically make a film about the cast and crew who worked on the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, who are then haunted by the entity of Freddy Krueger. Freddy Krueger had really become a joke in pop culture at this point, and really not scary anymore. So Wes Craven intended to make a film that would step back onto the plate of terror, but this time bringing horror to real life and real people, real life situations, and almost paying tribute to the people that make horror films. The lead character is actress Heather Langenkamp, who plays herself very brilliantly as well, I might add. And the film does so well of weaving in the personal lives of the actors and the narrative. Everyone who worked on the movie said it was one of the more fun times to be on set because it was like a reunion. Plus, this time around, Wes Craven could add more physical depth to Freddy Krueger on the exterior side, which was very scary. I love that moment when Freddy pops out of the closet and says, "Miss me." The film is so smart and poetic and fun, and it was unfortunately not as popular when it came out because Pulp Fiction was released at the same time and basically took all the box office. But thanks to video releases, this film indeed gained more popularity, as it should. It basically acted as a precursor to Wes Craven's next upcoming hit, which brings me to Scream at number 2. This is one of the greatest horror satire films that has ever been released. I first saw this film on VHS, of course, back in like 1997, and it scared the holy poop out of me when I was a kid. Especially the introduction. It's honest to God, one of the absolute best intro setup kills of a horror film ever made. It sets up the whole movie so damn well, beautifully pitched. When I watch it again, I still like getting caught up in the mystery of it. Like, who could have done this? Like, who could be the killer? You're weaving the plot backwards and forwards. Was it this person? No. Was it this person? No. Oh my goodness, who could it be? But I think it's this person. No. As I've gotten older, it made me so upset of seeing teenagers get killed. It's like, these are somebody's kids, son or daughter, that are being murdered here. And this is one of the first films that really made me think about that. And all the teenage kids are so smart here. That's one of my favorite things about it. You actually grow to like these characters, and it's a big deal when they're knocked off. Not like the Friday the 13th movies, where when they get knocked off, it's like, nice kill, Jason. It's horrible, I know. Also, with the mystery factor, I love that we, the audience, can feel who the killer was, but it's still hanging in the air until the very end, and we're like, of course, Billy. But Stu? Wow. I relate mostly to Randy, of course, because he's the movie nut, what can I say? And his speech on the rules in order to survive a horror film, it's classic stuff. If you have not seen this film, or if it's been a while since you've seen it, please give it another watch, as it remains one of the more classic films that honestly reignited the horror genre for the 90s. Now, here are some honorable mentions for the master of horror. Shocker, which, jeez Louise, this film is more fun and campy than anything else Wes Craven has done. He was trying to make it another take on Nightmare on Elm Street, with convict Horace Pinker using electricity from the TV to come back to life after dying from the electric chair to seek revenge. Definitely have a couple drinks responsibly before watching this one. You will laugh yourself silly. It's really good fun. Scream 3, which I know everyone doesn't like, but I remember seeing this in theaters with my dad, and I still find some things enjoyable about this film. Believe it or not, like the dream sequence with Sydney and her mom up in the cabin. That shot of her mom scared the frickin' bejesus out of me. But yes, the whole voice box thing with being able to do everyone's voices in the whole film, etc., it's very cheap and it's very unrealistic, but I still like some of the scenes with Lance Hendrickson, a legend, Patrick Warburton, Parker Posey, come on. She steals the show. Oh yeah, Jamie Kennedy's video cameo, of course. Deadly Friend, which, man, if only Wes Craven had the final cut on this. This is yet another film that Craven was battling the producers on, because the script was adapted from a novel simply called Friend, which was more sci-fi and honestly more touching. Of course, producers were like, no, this must be horror, that's what you do. So Wes Craven compromised, of course, to make it bloodier and more horror-like. The basketball kill obviously is the best thing, right? And all in all, it still has some of his touching themes that Craven really intended on including, which still makes this film a cult classic. Scream 4, which, again, I don't think a lot of people really like. I mean, I'll be honest, it's not my favorite, obviously. But I still respect what writer Kevin Williamson and what Craven were trying to do. It's a very tough thing to make a fourth installment fresh, which they certainly made an effort. I like using the handycam footage as a gateway to finding the killer, as they did. I love the fake intros in the very beginning. That's great, but I'm sorry, another spoiler. I did not buy Emma Roberts as the killer. I just couldn't. I have no idea why Hollywood is making a fifth installment of Scream. Oh boy. I saw the trailer. It looks absolutely pointless, but that's why we can look at Craven's work and admire what we did have, right? Paris, Je t'aime, which is a great anthological film chronicling 20 individual stories directed by 20 different directors, including the Coen brothers, Gus Van Sant, Alexander Payne, and of course, Wes Craven. He directs a very nice and lovely short with Rufus Sewell and Emily Mortimer breaking up with each other at a cemetery, and then Sewell is visited by the ghost of Oscar Wilde right there, giving him love advice. This short, among a couple others, really stood out to me because it was definitely out of the ordinary for Craven. And that's the testament of a real artist, that they can make another theme of a film very well outside of what they're known for and outside of popular demand. Very nice stuff here. Number 1 of Wes Craven. Ladies and gentlemen, of course, A Nightmare on Elm Street. Of course, people, this film, without a doubt, one of the most terrifying films in cinema, period. There is just something so original and simple, and yet brilliant of the story of teenage kids being terrified of going to sleep because they would come face to face to their demise by a murdered child molester named Freddy Krueger. I was honest to God terrified for a long time even seeing this film. I actually didn't see it all the way through until I was like 12. I saw scenes when I was really little and I just had to run out of the room. I could not take it. The very image of Freddy Krueger with that silhouette, with that stance that he had, with the claws, oh my God. The whole image of Freddy Krueger is just what nightmares are made of. I absolutely love the story Craven tells on how he was inspired by this story. He read this article of a young man in the Philippines who was terrified of going to sleep. Doctors, everyone gave him sleeping pills, which he hid under his bed. And then he was giving a sleeping pill secretly, unbeknownst to him. He was asleep in his bed until his parents heard thrashing and screaming, and by the time they got to his room, he was dead. When they did an autopsy on him, there was nothing physically wrong with him, no exterior wounds at all. They found a Mr. Coffee hiding behind his bed to keep him awake. All of this completely inspired Craven to give us the audience something to be even more terrified about. Robert Englund just owns the role of Freddy Krueger, as well as the rest of the cast. What I love even more about this film is how much was riding on New Line Cinema and Wes Craven to make it a hit. The box office failure of this film could very well have destroyed the company, because producer Bob Shaye did everything he could to finance it. Wes Craven was practically penniless when he made this film. Friday the 13th director Sean Cunningham told Wes Craven it won't work, because the audience won't be scared knowing the kids are only dreaming. But man, did this make a difference, not just with the audience, but for New Line Cinema, the cast and crew, and Wes Craven, spawning multiple sequels, TV series, reboots, and merchandising, which all was something Wes Craven was never expecting. I love this film so much, especially with all of its flaws, all its confusing ending, but it still remains one of the most influential and inspirational films, not just in horror, but in history. I'll be honest here, guys, I'm not really a diehard horror fan. I really like good horror films, not throwaway, disgusting torture porn stuff. Yeah, no thank you. But when it comes to Wes Craven's films, I'll always be a fan and supporter, not only because he was a brilliant writer and director, but because he was such a swell, soft-spoken, genuinely nice guy. May all of you watch the lot of his films every Halloween to keep his legacy strong. We have come to the end, ghouls and goblins, but please, tell me, do you agree with this list? What are some of your favorite Wes Craven films? Please comment on the video below to share, and yes, please share with all your friends. It's Halloween, have fun. If you like this, please click like right here, ring the bell so you can stay updated, and please subscribe. And until next time, sweet dreams.